The cell is 3 paces long, 2 paces wide, and barely tall enough for Arcturus to stand upright. Warp-lit conduits pulse beneath the metal walls like veins in a dying beast, casting sickly blue shadows that crawl across his skin. The restraints bite into his wrists, engineered with psych-dampening materials that make his skull throb whenever he reaches for his power. He drags himself to the bars, presses his forehead against their cold surface, and tries to remember what day it is, what year, which parts of his mind still belong to him. His throat feels raw, scraped hollow by screams he doesn't remember uttering. The Malleus Maleficarum hums around him, its ancient engines beating like a mechanical heart. Somewhere above, the ship's interrogators prepare new questions, new methods. Somewhere below, other prisoners wait for extraction or execution. The thought brings no comfort. "Patience," he whispers to himself, the words slipping between cracked lips. Patience. The flickering lumen in the corridor sputters, dims, then flares again. In that fractional darkness, he sees her. Amara stands in the corridor, her outline blurred at the edges as if viewed through tears or smoke. Her dark hair hangs loose around shoulders that once carried the weight of her own psychic potential with such natural grace. Her eyes, were they green or blue? The memory shifts, unreliable. Find her across the impossible distance. "Arcturus," she says, and the sound of her voice tears through him like a blade between ribs. "My love." He presses against the bars, forgetting the restraints until they jerk him back. Pain lances up his arms, but he barely notices. "You're not real," he tells the apparition, even as his heart hammers against his chest. "I've been waiting for you." Her voice carries notes he remembers from quiet moments stolen between Imperial indoctrination sessions. The softness when she spoke of freedom, the warmth when she described the life they might build together, somewhere beyond the Imperium's reach. "You're so close to finding me." The lumen flickers again, and she's nearer now, close enough that he could touch her if not for the bars, if not for the impossibility of her presence. "To saving me," she adds, and something in her tone shifts, a discordant note in a familiar melody. The change is subtle but jarring, like the moment a cherished memory reveals itself as tampered with. Arcturus recoils, his back hitting the opposite wall of the cell. The impact sends fresh waves of pain through his bruised body. "You're dead," he says, hating the words even as they leave his mouth. "I failed you. I couldn't save you." Amara's image wavers, distorts. For a heartbeat, something else stands in her place, something with too many angles, too fluid a form, before resolving into her familiar shape again. "Is that what you believe?" Her voice splits into harmonics, one thread still Amara's, another sliding beneath it like silk over bare skin. "That she's beyond your reach? That vengeance is all that remains?" Arcturus presses both hands to his temples, fingers digging into his red hair, now matted with sweat and blood. The ritual scars along his forearms burn, geometric patterns that mark his journey through psychic disciplines, now pulsing with an inner light that shouldn't be possible under the dampening field. "Get out," he hisses. "Get out of my head." A laugh ripples through his mind, intimate as a lover's touch. "I am your head, Arcturus. I am your grief, your rage, your purpose." No. He slides down the wall until he sits on the cold floor, knees drawn to his chest. "You're something else, something that found me when I was." "When you were broken? When you would have done anything to save her?" The voice no longer pretends to be Amara's. It has a texture all its own now, like velvet dragged across an open wound. "Revenge, Arcturus, Amara's memory, these are the things that truly fuel your actions, not the greater good you pretend to serve, not the revolution you claim to believe in." "Shut up," he mutters, but the words lack conviction. In the corridor, Amara's form dissolves into mist that seeps between the bars, reforming inside his cell. She kneels before him, close enough that he should feel her breath on his face. He doesn't. "They took me from you," she says, and now her voice is a perfect recreation of the real Amara, the exact pitch and cadence that has haunted his dreams for years. "They strapped me to their machines, cut me open, made me a vessel for their experiments." Each word drives into him like a nail. The memories surface unbidden, the fortress on Knum, the reports of a captured psyker, his frantic search, the moment he found her name on a processing list. The weeks of planning, the failed rescue attempt, her screams echoing through corridors he couldn't reach. "I know," he says, his voice breaking. I tried. Not hard enough. Her form flickers again, revealing the suggestion of wounds that map to the experiments detailed in the files he later stole. But you can still make them pay. The cell seems to contract around him, the walls pressing in. The warp-lit conduits pulse faster, syncing with his heartbeat. I want to hurt them, he admits, the words tearing free from some deep, wounded place inside him. To make them pay for what they did to Amara. Her image smiles, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. Yes, she whispers. Yes, my love. But even as he says it, some part of him, the part trained by the Scholastica Psychona to recognize psychic intrusion, the part that survived Imperial conditioning, recognizes the manipulation. The voice uses his pain, twists his memories, feeds the darkest impulses of his grief. Yet knowing the hook doesn't make it easier to resist the barb, especially when the pain is real, especially when the anger is justified. Arcturus stares at the apparition of the woman he failed to save, and wonders which is the greater betrayal, to fall prey to the demon's manipulations, or to forget the rage that keeps Amara's memory alive. The lumen in the corridor finally gives out, plunging the cell into darkness, broken only by the pulsing blue light of the warp conduits. In that near darkness, he can no longer see where Amara's form ends and the shadows begin. Memory is a treacherous thing for a psyker. It cuts deeper, lingers longer, takes on textures and dimensions that mundane minds cannot comprehend. Arcturus closes his eyes in his cell aboard the Malleus Maleficarum and falls backward through time, to the day he first saw Amara Sibella. The underground refuge glowed with contraband lumens, their light reflecting off condensation that beaded on metal walls. A sanctuary carved from an abandoned mining shaft beneath the industrial district of Hive Mortuus, where psychers not yet discovered by the black ships could breathe for a moment without fear. He had come there seeking components for a psi-dampening device, a tool to help him pass undetected among Imperial officials. The refuge operated as both sanctuary and black market, with shadowed corners where those with the right connections could acquire forbidden knowledge or technology. Arcturus remembers standing at a makeshift counter, haggling with a trader whose left eye had been replaced with a crimson augmetic that constantly recalibrated. Then she walked in. Amara Sibella stood 5'8", her posture marked by the particular alertness of someone accustomed to watching for threats. Long dark hair fell past her shoulders, framing features that managed to look both delicate and determined. Her eyes caught the light as she scanned the room. Were they green or blue? In some memories they shine emerald, in others they reflect the deep azure of oceans he's seen only in picked captures. The contradiction tears at him, evidence of something corrupting even his most precious recollections. She wore the drab coveralls of a maintenance worker, the perfect disguise for moving through the hive's service tunnels unnoticed. Yet she carried herself with a dignity that no uniform could disguise, a lean athletic build moving with deliberate grace through the crowded space. What struck him most even then was the absence of fear in her movements. Every other psyker he'd encountered, himself included, carried their power like a shameful secret, hunched shoulders and darting eyes betraying their constant vigilance. Amara moved as if she had every right to exist. "You're staring," she said when she reached the counter, not looking at him, but somehow knowing he watched her. "You're projecting," he replied, feeling the faint psychic aura that surrounded her, undisciplined but potent, loud enough for every sensitive in this place to notice. She turned then, and the full force of her attention hit him like a physical blow. "And you're one to talk about control? Your barriers are like tissue paper." The trader behind the counter made a hasty retreat, recognizing the unpredictability of psyker confrontations. But what began as tension dissolved into unexpected understanding. They spent hours in a secluded alcove, speaking in hushed tones about their abilities, their brushes with detection, their narrow escapes. "I was 12 when it manifested," she told him, fingers tracing patterns on the metal table between them. "Set my father's workshop on fire without touching it. He knew what it meant. Helped me hide rather than turning me in." Arcturus nodded. "The Scholastica found me at 9. I've been playing their game ever since, pretending to be the loyal Imperial psyker while looking for a way out." "There is no way out," she said, but without bitterness. "Not individually. That's why I'm building connections. creating a network. One day we'll have enough of us to actually make a difference. Her fierce optimism infected him. In the weeks that followed, they met whenever his duties as an Imperial adept allowed, sharing techniques for controlling their abilities, plotting theoretical escapes from Imperial space. Their psychic rapport deepened into something more personal, more profound. When their hands first touched, passing a data slate containing forbidden texts on psychic techniques, the contact sent ripples of energy between them that neither could ignore. Their first kiss tasted of hope, a flavor Arcturus had forgotten existed. For 6 months, they carved out moments of impossible happiness in the shadows of an empire that would execute them both for the crime of their existence. They dreamed of distant worlds, of finding passage on a rogue trader vessel, of building a life where their abilities would be valued rather than feared. "The Eastern Fringe," she whispered one night, her head resting on his chest in the narrow confines of his hab unit. "I've heard rumors about Xenos there who don't fear psychers, who might even welcome us." "The Tau," he replied, the word itself dangerous to speak. "But that's just a fantasy, the distance alone." "Every revolution begins as a fantasy," she said, rising on one elbow to look at him. "Every change starts with someone crazy enough to believe in something better." 3 days later, she disappeared. The warning came from one of their contacts, a clerk in the administratum with access to inquisitorial bulletins. A psyker sweep was planned for the lower maintenance sectors. Arcturus tried to reach her, sending coded messages through their established channels. Nothing. 2 agonizing days passed before he infiltrated the security archives and found the truth. The Inquisition hadn't been conducting a routine sweep. They'd been hunting specifically for Amara. Someone had informed on her, flagging her growing psychic signature as a potential threat. The pic capture on the arrest record showed her face bloody, her eyes wild with fear as armored figures dragged her toward a black transport. Arcturus remembers the sickness that gripped him then, the cold certainty that settled in his gut. They had taken her to Fortress Redemptus on Knum, a facility whose official purpose was psychic evaluation and rehabilitation. Its unofficial purpose was known only through whispered rumors, experimental procedures, psychic vivisection, the testing of warp interfaces that required living subjects. He arranged for reassignment, calling in favors that left him dangerously exposed. By the time he reached Knum, weeks had passed. The fortress stood on a blasted plain of red rock, its spires reaching toward the dust-choked sky like accusing fingers. Getting inside required compromising security systems, falsifying credentials, bribing officials. The deeper he penetrated, the more horrific the evidence became. Experiment logs, procedure recordings. Amara's screams echoed through sterile corridors, captured on monitoring devices that recorded every detail of her suffering in the name of Imperial science. In the lowest level, behind blast doors marked with warnings in ancient script, Arcturus found an archive of forbidden knowledge, texts seized from heretics and kept for the Inquisition's use. There, in his desperation, he discovered the ritual. Ancient parchment described a means to reach across the barriers of reality, to pull a soul back from the brink of destruction. The warnings were explicit. The cost would be high, the danger extreme. But Amara's voice still echoed in his ears, her pain feeding his frenzy. He memorized the intricate patterns, the words of power, the precise sequence of psychic emanations required. When he finally found her cell, she was already gone. Not dead, that would have been a mercy. Hollowed out, her consciousness systematically dissected until nothing remained but an empty vessel, eyes staring at nothing, body responding only to basic stimuli. In that moment of crushing realization, something broke inside Arcturus. He completed the ritual anyway, drawing the forbidden symbols in his own blood, focusing his psychic energy through pathways never meant for human minds. He poured every ounce of his power, his grief, his rage into tearing open the veil between worlds, and found only darkness. The ritual failed, or seemed to. Amara remained an empty shell. The guards discovered his intrusion. He barely escaped with his life, fleeing Knum with Imperial forces in pursuit and the weight of his failure crushing his soul. What he didn't realize then, what he wouldn't understand until much later, was that the ritual had succeeded, just not in the way he intended. He had opened a door, and something had stepped through. The summoning of a demon is not a thunderous event. There is no crack of lightning, no swirling vortex, no dramatic manifestation that storytellers might describe. Jathik, the whispering shade of Slanesh, entered reality through the fracture in Arcturus's psyche as quietly as dusk settles over a battlefield. The failed ritual left no visible mark, no immediate sign that anything had changed. As Arcturus fled Khnum, evading Imperial patrols with the hollow shell of his failure weighing on him, he remained unaware of the passenger he now carried, the shadow that had attached itself to the darkest corners of his consciousness. The first manifestation came 3 weeks later. Arcturus had found temporary refuge in the underhive of a neighboring system, renting a shabby hab unit with false credentials. Sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amara's vacant stare, her body functioning while her mind had been systematically dismantled by Imperial science. He sat on the edge of his cot, head in hands, when the thought slid into his mind with such natural ease that he never questioned its origin. Perhaps she isn't truly gone. He straightened, heart suddenly racing. Where had that come from? The ritual had failed. He had seen the empty vessel that remained of the woman he loved. Yet the idea persisted, growing more insistent with each passing minute. Not his usual desperate denial, but a new certainty that took root in fertile soil of exhaustion and grief. Parts of her essence may still exist, scattered across the immaterium, fragments that could be recovered, reassembled. Arcturus paced the narrow confines of his room, the thought expanding into elaborate scenarios, possibilities he'd never considered. By morning, he had filled 3 data slates with notes, diagrams, theoretical approaches to psychic reconstruction of a shattered consciousness. He didn't hear Jathik's laughter, soft and satisfied, echoing in the space between his thoughts. 2 months passed. Arcturus moved between systems, always one step ahead of Imperial agents tracking the rogue psyker who had breached a secure facility. His research grew more esoteric, drawing him to forbidden texts and practitioners of questionable arts. The voice, still indistinguishable from his own internal monologue, guided him toward increasingly dangerous knowledge. The first true vision came in the cargo hold of a merchant vessel where he'd stowed away. Exhausted from days without proper rest, Arcturus dozed against a stack of crates. When he opened his eyes, Amara stood before him, her outline blurred at the edges, but her face, her beautiful, intact face, perfectly clear. "Arcturus," she said, her voice exactly as he remembered. "I'm still here." He scrambled to his feet, knowing it couldn't be real, yet unable to deny the evidence before him. "Amara, I'm trapped," she said, reaching toward him with hands that seemed to fade into mist at the wrists. "Not dead, not gone, just scattered. I need you to find me, to bring me back." Before he could touch her, the vision dissipated, leaving him alone in the darkened hold. He wept then, not from grief, but from a surging, irrational hope. It was the first direct sensory illusion Jathik crafted, but far from the last. The demon learned from Arcturus's reactions, refining its techniques, creating increasingly elaborate manifestations that played on his deepest desires. Sometimes Amara appeared whole and vibrant, speaking of their past together, reminding him of shared moments that reinforced his emotional attachment. Other times she came as a tortured apparition, describing ongoing suffering that demanded his intervention. Each vision left Arcturus more desperate, more willing to pursue any avenue that might lead to her restoration. The demon was patient. It didn't rush to reveal its nature or make demands. Instead, it wove itself into the fabric of Arcturus's perception so gradually that he never noticed the seams. Jathik studied his host intimately, every memory, every fear, every flicker of desire. It noted how Arcturus's resentment toward the Imperium had festered long before Amara's capture, how his experiences in the Scholastica Sakana had left him with a foundation of bitterness that now served as perfect mortar for the demon's construction. 8 months after the ritual, Arcturus made contact with agents of the Tau Empire. This, too, seemed to arise from his own initiative, a logical extension of his search for allies against the Imperium. The demon whispered strategies for the negotiation, coached him on which truths to tell and which to withhold, all while remaining hidden behind the veil of his own consciousness. They can provide resources, access, power, use them. The Tau welcomed the defector. eager to exploit his knowledge of Imperial psychic protocols and defense systems. They never suspected that the tactical brilliance he occasionally displayed came from a source far older and more malevolent than any human mind. As Arcturus moved deeper into Tau territory, Jathik's influence grew more direct. The visions of Amara became more frequent, more demanding. They began to focus his resentment, channeling his grief into concentrated hatred. "Remember what they did to me," Amara's apparition would whisper, standing behind him as he reviewed Imperial defense schematics for his Tau handlers. "Remember how they took me apart, piece by piece, to satisfy their curiosity." His hatred for the Imperium, once political and philosophical, transformed into something visceral and personal. Each Imperial atrocity he helped the Tau exploit felt like a small revenge. Each strategic victory became a step towards some undefined justice. "Embrace the power of your rage," the voice suggested during a particularly difficult operation against an Imperial outpost. This time, the thought carried a different texture, a subtle hint of otherness that might have alarmed him once. But Arcturus had grown accustomed to the voice, had come to rely on its counsel. The line between his own thoughts and the demon's suggestions had blurred beyond recognition. When he unleashed his psychic abilities against the Imperial defenders, the rush of power felt different, stronger, darker, tinged with a pleasure that bordered on ecstatic. Jathik fed on the sensations, on the deaths, on Arcturus's growing comfort with brutality. Each act of violence strengthened the demon's hold, creating a feedback loop of power and corruption. By the time Arcturus realized something might be wrong, in rare, quiet moments when doubt crept in, the demon had integrated itself too thoroughly to be distinguished from his own psyche. Every time he questioned a particularly cruel impulse or an unusually bloodthirsty strategy, Jathik would summon Amara's image, remind him of his purpose, and the doubts would subside. "This is who you've always been," the demon would suggest, its voice now a permanent feature of his internal landscape. "This is what they made you when they took her. You're simply becoming what you were meant to be." And Arcturus, desperate for purpose, for vengeance, for any connection to Amara, accepted this as truth. The demon's voice became his own, its desires indistinguishable from his authentic impulses. Jathik, master of sensation and perception, had crafted the perfect illusion, one that existed not in the world around Arcturus, but within the territory of his own mind. In the darkness of his quarters, Arcturus Kyrios paces like a caged predator. His mind churns with doubt, each step a pendulum swing between conviction and uncertainty. The Tau speak of their greater good with such certainty, a philosophy that once seemed so pure compared to Imperial dogma, yet now feels hollow against the weight of his personal vendetta. He pauses, pressing his fingers against his temples, where the ritual scars throb with an unnatural heat. "Is this truly for the greater good?" he whispers to the empty room, "or merely my own insatiable thirst for revenge?" The question hangs unanswered in the stale air. Arcturus's reflection catches in a polished metal surface, green eyes burning with an intensity that doesn't feel entirely his own. The geometric patterns carved into his skin pulse with a subtle glow, visible even in the dim light. He traces them with his fingertip, following the patterns he once believed would help contain and focus his powers. Jathik's presence shifts inside him. For months, the entity has been a subtle influence, a whisper at the edges of consciousness, slithering like smoke through the labyrinth of his thoughts. But now something changes. The voice crystallizes, no longer content to suggest and imply. "Arcturus Kyrios." The words resonate not in his ears but deep within his skull, each syllable distinct and chilling. "I, Jathik, extend a covenant forged in destruction and flame." Arcturus freezes mid-step. The temperature in the room plummets, his breath visible in clouds before his face. Ethereal motes of light materialize around him, flickering like fireflies in colors that have no name in human language. "Surrender your will to my command," the voice continues, seductive and terrible, "and I shall grant you the vengeance you so desperately seek, reuniting you with Amara's essence beyond the veil." Amara's name strikes him like a physical blow. Her face materializes in his mind, not the broken, bloodied visage from his nightmares, but as she was, laughing, her eyes crinkling at the corners, the faint birthmark beneath her jaw that he used to trace with his thumb. The memory feels simultaneously like a gift and a violation. How dare you speak her name, Arcturus hisses, but there's no strength behind his resistance. The motes of light swirl faster now, creating patterns that echo the scars on his skin. In their glow, shadows dance across the walls, shadows that move independently of any source, twisting into forms that suggest faces in agony, bodies contorted in both pleasure and pain. You have always known, deep in the chambers of your heart, Jathik purrs. You were never free. Every choice, every step away from the Imperium's grasp, guided by my hand. The realization crashes through Arcturus's defenses. Every secret communication with the Tau, every carefully orchestrated leak of Imperial intelligence, every justification he'd crafted to explain his defection, all of it orchestrated by this entity that had nestled within his rage and grief. No, he protests, but even as he denies it, memories resurface with new clarity. The subtle nudges towards certain decisions, the convenient opportunities, the way his psychic abilities had grown beyond what any Imperial training could explain. This was my choice, my revenge. Your revenge, Jathik concedes, his voice dripping with a chilling gentleness that belies the darkness of his words. Your motivation, ignited by the searing hatred you harbor towards the God Emperor's ruthless servants who condemned your beloved Amara to death for the unforgivable sin of being a psyker. I merely guided the fury that burns within you. Arcturus sinks to his knees, the truth too heavy to bear standing. He has been a pawn, worse, a willing pawn, so eager for vengeance that he embraced manipulation as free will. He helped orchestrate the Tau's incursion into the Montu System, believing it served both their cause and his personal vendetta. The Tau, he manages, his voice raw. Do they know what you are? Laughter ripples through his mind, a sound like glass breaking underwater. The Tau understand even less than you. They believe their science shields them from the warp's touch. Such delicious ignorance. Outside the viewport of his quarters, the stars seem to pulse in time with Arcturus's heartbeat. His left hand trembles uncontrollably, and he watches it as if it belongs to a stranger. The Imperium warned me, he says, more to himself than to the demon. All those years in the Scholastica Psychana, they spoke of corruption, of voices that would offer everything I desired. And yet you listened to me, Jathik responds, because unlike the Emperor, I deliver on my promises. Your false god demands sacrifice without reward. I offer fair exchange. Arcturus closes his eyes, but it makes no difference. The ethereal lights penetrate his eyelids, and Jathik's presence fills every corner of his consciousness. He thinks of Amara again, not just her face, but her essence, her spirit. The thought that some fragment of her might exist beyond death, accessible through this unholy pact, weakens his resistance further. What must I do? He asks, hating himself for the question, even as it leaves his lips. Continue as you have, Jathik replies. Guide the Tau, facilitate their war with the Imperium, but know that you serve me first. When the moment comes, you will open the way. Open the way for what? The lights around him coalesce, forming an image that burns itself into his mind. The Montu System transformed, its worlds twisted by forces beyond mortal comprehension. At the center, a rift in reality through which something vast and hungry peers. For the true liberation of humanity, Jathik whispers, for the pleasure and pain that is Slanesh's embrace. The name sends a jolt of recognition through Arcturus. Chaos. He stands at the precipice of damnation, facing a choice that is no choice at all. The Imperial creed he once rejected was right about one thing. There are fates worse than death. But Amara, the possibility of Amara. His breath hitches, a moment of hesitation transforming into resolve. The empire that executed her deserves whatever comes. The Tau who used him as a tool against his own kind merit no loyalty. If damnation is the price for vengeance and reunion, so be it. I accept your pact, Arcturus declares, his voice steady, even as something cold settles in his stomach. The ethereal lights flash blindingly bright, then plunge into his flesh through the ritual scars. Pain unlike anything he's experienced sears through every nerve, but it lasts only seconds. When it fades, he feels different, stronger, more certain, yet somehow less himself. Jathik's presence shifts, no longer a voice apart but integrated into his thoughts. Through their joined consciousness, Arcturus perceives the demon's broader design with terrible clarity. The war between the Tau and the Imperium is merely a diversion, a conflict that draws attention and resources, while the true invasion gestates in the shadows. The Montu System, with its strategic position and psychically sensitive populations, will serve as Slaaneş's gateway, a breach point through which corruption will flow like water through a broken dam. Arcturus rises to his feet within the cramped confines of his dimly lit prison cell, his movements imbued with a fluid grace that strikes a balance between the instinctual and the otherworldly. The cold air wraps around him, yet he feels an undeniable resolve as he plots his next move. His eyes lock onto the bars, and with a newfound sense of purpose. His fingers, steady and precise, reach with the restraints that still bind his wrists, the psych-dampening materials a harsh reminder of his captivity, the cool metal of the bars sending a shiver up his spine as the last remnants of his former self are swallowed by the heavy burden of his dark bargain. "For Amara," he murmurs, his voice barely above a whisper as he presses his forehead against the cold metal bars, a faint glow illuminating the desperation etched on his face. "For vengeance." In the vast expanse of the Imperium, something ancient and insatiable stirs, its malevolent presence awakening in eager anticipation. Turning his gaze towards the guards stationed at the door, he commands with an unwavering authority, "I will speak to Kale Thraxus now." His tone leaves no room for doubt, echoing with the weight of his intent.
From ash to fire, a spark ignites the dark inside us. Shadows, shadows calling, shadows, shadows calling me. This is the darkness inside.